Welcome back, Sebastian here. It's time for my review for qualifying for the inaugural Vegas Grand Prix. So, for the start of Q1, there was a decent amount of track evolution early. So both Alfa Romeo and Haas, both up in the top 5 with their second runs in Q1. And with the track being a street track, we knew that there was a possibility of having red flags and lots of delays. Thankfully, the drivers did a very good job tonight, and no big crashes and no red flags. So Leclerc was very rapid, 3 purple sectors on his first flying lap. Some cars doing multiple warm-up laps, track very cold, so that's been a big talking point coming into this weekend. But with cars doing multiple warm-up laps, they're able to get the tires into the correct window eventually. Russell, Tsunoda, Stroll, Gasly, and Hülkenberg were the 5 drivers at risk of elimination after the first runs. Piastri then brushes the wall at turn 5. That's been a spot where drivers had been very, very close. The other one's the wall on the exit, basically of the exit of the corner going down the Vegas Strip. Russell and Tsunoda both get laps deleted for track limits. I think both of them, they were at the chicane at the Sphere. And both of them basically just aborted their laps shortly after. The track is so long, you might as well just recharge your batteries and try again. Tsunoda then on this final run causes the yellow flag at turn 5, which basically ends any chance of him getting through to Q2. And we end up with both McLarens being eliminated in Q1. A bit of a surprise. I kind of expected them to struggle a bit this weekend, not be the second strongest team. But double knockout in Q1 is definitely not what I was expecting. They show a replay of basically cars racing down before the last laps, and Ocon and Verstappen basically racing into turn 1. They would go on the radio, call each other idiots, and other not very nice words. 5 drivers eliminated from Q1 are Norris, Ocon, Zhou, Piastri, and Tsunoda. So into Q2 we go. Actually, before we got to Q2, there was a message from the FIA from race control that came up during the break between Q1 and Q2, and that was that Stroll was under investigation for failing to slow down for the yellow flags that were caused by Tsunoda. So if that's indeed the case, that's a slam dunk penalty. It'll probably be a 3-place grid drop or a 5-place grid drop, depending on if it was double waved yellows or just a single yellow flag. Let's see, so into Q2 we go, and because drivers are having to manage the tires that they're using through qualifying, some drivers were using used tires for their first run. So after the first runs, Hülkenberg, Bottas, Ricciardo, Stroll, and Sargent were the drivers in the bottom 5. Ferrari were very quick. Leclerc was 7/10 faster than Verstappen, despite the fact that they set lap times very, very close together. I don't know if Verstappen was using used tires at that point, but still quite a sizable gap between the Ferrari and the Red Bull. So there's something that I noticed. So with about 2 minutes to go into session, Perez was in the pits, and they basically put him up on the trolleys, I guess, and they were wheeling him into the garage with only 2 minutes left to go into session. But he was only in 6th place, and he did not have a massive margin to the knockout zone. So I was quite surprised by that, and it turns out quite a few drivers who were in that bottom 5 and below him improved on their laps and beat Perez. So Perez, shockingly out of Q2 for once, not really his own fault. Of course, he could have driven faster, but still, it does look like it's a strategical error on the part of Red Bull, kind of underestimating what the cutoff time would be to get into Q3. Hamilton is also somehow out too, despite looking very good in Q1. So he came on the radio as well saying he couldn't do any better. So I don't know if he made a mistake or something, but a bit of a surprise to have both Perez and Hamilton out in Q2. So the complete set of 5 drivers out were Ricciardo, Stroll, Hülkenberg, Perez, and Hamilton. And Perez was out by only 0.046, so half a tenth of a second roughly. And I believe Hamilton was even less than that. So very, very fine margins getting into Q3. So into Q3 we go. The Haas and the Williams both using used tires. Ferrari have a 1-2 after their first runs, showing really good pace over 1 lap throughout the whole qualifying session. Verstappen was 3rd, and the 3 of them were separated by less than a tenth of a second. There was quite a long delay because basically there was quite a sizable gap between the first runs and the second runs where everyone went out. No one basically ran in that gap. Usually you'll have like 1 or 2 cars running in that gap between the 2 runs, but none this time. So Leclerc improved quite a bit on his time in Sector 2, setting a new purple sector in Sector 2. Verstappen, yellow Sector 1, yellow Sector 2, not improving on his lap time, and he basically just decides to not bother finishing a lap and enters the pit lane, and Alonso does the same. So, Leclerc sets a new personal best. Sainz also sets a really good time, very, very close to Leclerc. So your top 5 after your end of qualifying were Leclerc, Sainz, Verstappen. Russell gets a good lap in at the end, and Gasly, really, really surprised by Gasly with that lap. I expected the Alpines to struggle much like they did at Monza. Long straights, and we know that the Alpine generally is a bit down on power compared to the other cars. So a bit of a surprise to see them do that well, especially since Ocon got knocked out in Q1. So taking a look at the grid for tomorrow's race, Leclerc on pole, Verstappen P2. That's box office, assuming that Leclerc actually gets around to start the race this time. Russell third, fourth Gasly. Of course, this is with Sainz 10 points grid penalty that he incurred after the track decided to damage his car during what was a very, I guess at this point, infamous FP1. That's a whole other discussion talking about the penalty and whether it should have been a penalty or not. But the reality is that, unfortunately for Ferrari, unfortunately for Sainz, he has that penalty. So, continuing down the grid, fourth Gasly, fifth Albon, sixth Sargent. Excellent result for Williams. Both drivers will be starting on the third row of the grid. Great result for Sargent as well. A couple tenths off his teammate, but that's honestly not too bad. And I think definitely his best starting position in F1 by a mile. Seventh Bottas, eighth Magnussen. Really good results for them. I didn't really expect either of them to be there. And having two Williams, Alfa Romeo, and a Haas, 4 cars from the bottom 4 teams in the constructors is definitely quite unusual. But I guess that's the way it is with Vegas being a pretty unusual circuit. 9th Alonso, and then 10th Hamilton moves up into the top 10 with that grid penalty. 11th Perez, 12th Sainz, knocked all the way down to 12th from 2nd. 13th Hulkenberg, 14th Stroll, 15th Ricciardo, 16th Norris, 17th Ocon, 18th Show, 19th Piastri, and 20th Tsunoda. So fairly interesting grid for tomorrow's race. I do have some reservations about the actual racing tomorrow. I've read a couple comments online about how they were pretty interesting. They were basically, even though we have these massive long straights, basically 3 long straights, because they're all running low downforce setups, it means that the DRS is going to be a lot less powerful than it would be on a more high downforce track. So you're liable to running into the same kind of problems we had at Monza, where even though you have those massive long straights, because they're running the low downforce setups, the DRS isn't as useful, and they just end up being unable to pass each other. So, closing up this video, 3 big talking points from the session. I think the first one, for me, I think Ferrari 1 lap pace, really strong 1 lap pace. I don't think Verstappen would have been able to get pole, but really good for them. Of course, they've gotten quite a few pole positions the second half of the season, so that's definitely a big one. Second one, on the opposite end of the grid, I think McLaren, lack of pace. Really surprising. I would have at least bare minimum expected Norris to get into Q3, Piastri get into Q2, kind of be around the 7th to 14th range for both cars. So for both of them to be knocked out in Q1, definitely a big surprise for me. Third talking point, I think for this one, I think I'm going to just go with Perez strategy error. So I think a strategical error on Red Bull's part that contributed to Perez getting knocked out. I don't know if there was something else, like there was a technical issue on the car, they didn't have the tires, or what it was. But from the outside at this point, it looks like it wasn't a mistake by Red Bull, costing Perez a shot in Q3. So that's all for my review of qualifying for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, one of the few races of the year that I can actually watch during the daytime. So looking forward to the Grand Prix tomorrow. Not a ton of expectations for the quality of the racing, but it being Vegas, we know that the spectacle will be something to watch. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.